Om Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramaddanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishno Vande Jagadgurum. Welcome everyone to a new semester at USC. You guys have a nice break, more or less. Some of you visited India, but not all of you, right? Oh, yeah, you did too. Okay, you did not. Yes, okay. Good. So you're rested and ready for the new semester. All right. So we ended last semester on Shloka 28. We finished by discussing of chapter 2. Shloka 28 of chapter 2. Avyaktadini Bhutani Vyaktamadhyani Bharat. Just to kind of recap a little bit, what's been going on so far? Arjuna is a warrior, a great warrior, maybe the greatest of warriors, but he refuses to fight in a just war against some very bad people. Partly because some of those very bad people happen to be his loved ones, his relatives, his gurus, his teachers. And so in the second chapter, Krishna is trying to convince Arjuna to fight in the war. And what we've seen so far in chapter 2 is that he begins with some very high Vedantic teachings about the true nature of the self. He says, you're fundamentally mistaken in thinking that you are this body-mind complex, which perishes. Because in fact, none of us ever die. Because we are eternal souls, which cannot be killed, which are never born, in fact. Okay, that's the recap. Now, still along those lines, verse 29 continues as follows. So please go to verse 29 of chapter 2. Ashcharyavat. Oh, and before we get in it, while you're accessing it on your app, by the way, for those online who don't know, we're using this Vande Mataram app on the Bhagavad Gita. Another thing I want to recap briefly is the method, because there's so many commentaries out there and translations. Which one do we use? Because there's no right answer to that question and no easy answer, what I've decided to do is bring in mostly 4 different commentaries at different times. I look at all of them more or less for each verse, and whichever ones I think are most useful or insightful, I mention them. What are the 4? Shankara's commentary from his standpoint of Advaita Vedanta, Ramanuja's commentary from his standpoint of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, Sri Aurobindo's commentary, which is called Essays on the Gita. He wrote it in English, about 600-page commentary, and one by Swami Tapasenandaji, who is a monk of the Ramakrishna order. And he has given a very interesting interpretation of the Gita from the standpoint of the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition. So looking at all of these, so you'll see that in the course of our discussion, I'll be referring to some of them, but don't expect me to mention all 4 of them in every verse. That'll take us forever, and sometimes I don't think that it's worth talking about all of them. Okay? So that's just some background, especially for the benefit of those who are new here. Hello, welcome. But you're not new, I've seen you before, yeah. Okay, so we're now about to discuss Shloka 29 of chapter 2. Please repeat after me. I'll read them quarter by quarter, each of the verses. Ashcharyavat pashyati kaschidinam Ashcharyavat vadati tathaiva chanyah Ashcharyavat chainamanya shrunoti Shrutvaapyenam Vedana chaiva kaschit. Okay, this is the longer meter, which comes up on rare occasions. Most of the time, the meter is shloka meter, which is 8 syllables, 8 syllables, 8 syllables, 8 syllables. But this is longer. I think it's 11, 11, 11, 11. A little bit harder to recite. So underneath the Devanagari, the Sanskrit of the shloka, there should be Anvaya. Do you have Anvaya on do you see that in your app? So I'm going to go through the Anvaya. What does Anvaya mean? Again, for those who are new, it means It's a rearrangement of the words in the verse to make it more easily intelligible. Okay? So, kaschit, someone, enam. This enam is referring to the Atman, which has been talked about in many previous shlokas. Someone, this Atman, ascharyavat pashyati, sees this Atman as something extraordinarily wonderful, almost miraculous. Sees here is interesting. It can mean different things, but because the Atman is not a physical object, it's not something you can see with your eyes, many commentators take it to mean realization. Those who have realized the Atman recognize that it's something incredibly wonderful, wondrous. Tatha eva, likewise for cha anyaha, another person who ascharyavat vadati, another one speaks of this Atman as extraordinarily wondrous. Anyaha, another person, cha enam ascharyavat shrunoti, another one hears of this wonderful doctrine of the Atman, right? Maybe from a guru or from a teacher, a Vedanta teacher. Na kaschit cha shrutva api enam veda eva. This part is very interesting from an interpretive standpoint, the last part of it. But nobody, even after hearing about the wondrous Atman, enam veda eva, knows it, knows the Atman. Okay, so there's a number of things to discuss here, but I wanted to mention, first of all, Shankaracharya, the great Advaita Vedantin, he interprets this shloka in this way, and then says that there's an alternative interpretation of this, which I find quite interesting, because I'm not sure that other commentators have suggested this. He says, grammatically speaking, you can also interpret this entire verse in a different way, where the verse is referring to the person who has realized the Atman, the self, as a wonderful person. Not that the Atman itself is wonderful, but that the person who has realized the self is the wonderful one. Okay, so that's interesting. That's why I thought I would mention it. But now we get to this very interesting last. So the last phrase in this verse is na veda na chaiva kaschid. So nobody has known the Atman. What do you think that means? Or why is that an apparently puzzling statement to make, for Krishna to make in the Bhagavad Gita? Think about it. Or you think it's very reasonable to say that?
People might just do it, but I mean, they don't realize it. It's just something that they know intellectually, but not something someone realizes.
But then the meaning of that would be then that nobody in the world has ever realized the Atman. Is that really what Krishna could have meant? That's what I'm asking. So what could he mean when he says, this is literally Sri Aurobindo's translation. You can look at, no human mind has ever known this absolute. So the reason why this might seem puzzling from the standpoint of Vedanta, it's a Vedantic scripture, one of the greatest, right? Because the whole purpose of Vedanta, the goal of life according to Vedanta, is the realization of the Atman, or God, whatever you want to call it. But this sentence, if taken literally, in a very direct way, seems to be saying that nobody can actually know the Atman, what we are in our true nature, which sounds a lot like a Kantian agnosticism. Does anyone know about Immanuel Kant? Has anyone heard about his philosophy? He was a great German philosopher, and he wrote this masterpiece, philosophical masterpiece, called Critique of Pure Reason, where he argues with very elaborate philosophical argumentation that even though we should have faith in God, none of us can ever know God. Knowledge of God is not possible. Why? Because the human mind is fundamentally limited. And because it's limited, we can only know the things that are perceivable in this world. Sense objects or our own thoughts, for instance. But we can never know what he called super sensible entities, meaning things beyond the five senses, including God, including our souls. But he says he was not an atheist and didn't say we shouldn't believe. He said we must believe in these things. But on the basis of faith rather than knowledge. So then the question is, another way of putting it in a more philosophically sophisticated way is, when Bhagavan Krishna says, nobody can know the Atman, is he defending a kind of Kantian agnosticism? That even though there might be a God, we can never know God. What do you think? And if he's not defending this Kantian agnosticism, then what exactly is he saying? If you don't have any suggestions, I can give you my own, my humble suggestions. But I want to give you an opportunity first. Okay, you're interested in what I have to say then, or what? Huh? Okay, so this is what I've come up with. I think there are two possible ways of interpreting this last phrase, this last statement, that nobody can know the Atman, has known the Atman. One is to sort of qualify the statement a little bit and say what Bhagavan Krishna is really saying is that no one can know God fully. One can only know God from a particular standpoint, partially, in a particular form, but not fully. So that's one possibility. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna used to teach this very frequently. He would say, he would give this beautiful example of an ant which goes to a hill of sugar, this giant hill of sugar. And the ant is very excited. And with great difficulty, it takes one grain of that sugar and then gets a little puffed up with pride and says, next time I come to the sugar hill, I'm going to take the whole hill. And so Sri Ramakrishna says, even if you realize God, never think that you've known God fully. And he says it's not even necessary to know God fully. He gives another example of the Ganga, the river Ganga, the sacred river Ganga. He says, in order to have touched the Ganga, do you have to start from, it starts in Gomukh, right? Up in the chilly Himalayas, much colder than here, by the way, even though you guys are complaining about the cold here. But anyway, you go to Gomukh, and do you have to run your finger starting from the source of the Ganga and then go all the way down to South India? No. He says, if you touch the Ganga at any point, you can say you've touched the Ganga. Likewise, if you realize God in any form or aspect, you've realized God. But don't hubristically say that I've known all there is to know about God, because God is infinite. And another thing that Sri Ramakrishna teaches, there's no limit to God. Bhagavan kono iti nahi. He would speak in Bangla, he was Bengali. Never put a limit to God and say, God can only be this and no more. Okay, so that's one interpretation that I'm suggesting. I haven't found this in any of the commentaries, but this is kind of a Ramakrishnan interpretation of this statement. And there's a second way, which is that maybe what Bhagavan Krishna is saying is that the Atman cannot be known by the ordinary human mind. We have to qualify this word, nobody can know, not in that sense. Nobody with an ordinary, unrefined, impure mind can know the Atman, with a mind full of worldly desires and pleasures. So why do I say this? This involves a little bit of scriptural discussion. So first of all, many of the Vedāntic scriptures, the Upanishads, which are the basis of Bhagavad Gita actually, right? Repeatedly, these Upanishads teach that the mind cannot know the Atman. Can any of you think of any scriptural verses that say this? Does anything come up? Very good. That's the one I was thinking of actually. Which Upanishad is that from? Taittiriya Upanishad. Good, but he knows the verse, which is very good. Mantra. Taittiriya Upanishad, yato vacho nivattante aprapya manasa saha. It's describing Brahman. This great Rishi is saying that he's defining Brahman as that from which words, vacho, and from which mind turn back, baffled. Because words realize we can never describe Brahman. Because the mind realizes I can never know Brahman. What is the mind there? That's the question. Again, the similar question with the Bhagavad Gita here. At the same time, there are other Upanishads in other places which say that the Atman can be known through a suitably prepared mind. So I wanted to give you one example. Kathopanishad 1.3.12, giving you the references in case you want to look them up later. Esha sarveshu bhuteshu gudotma na prakashate drishyate tvagya buddhya sukshmaya sukshmadarshibihi. The rough translation is, this Atman, which is the deepest self in all of us, is not apparent to most people. It does not make itself manifest. Esha sarveshu bhuteshu gudotma na prakashate. It's Guda Atma. It's deeply hidden in the deepest recesses of our heart. Drishyate tvagraya buddhya sukshmaya sukshmadarshibihi. But it can be perceived, realized with a refined intellect. So again, this reminds me of a teaching of Sri Ramakrishna's, which some people find cryptic. He would often say in Bangla, Shuddha Mon, Shuddha Buddhi, Shuddha Atma Ak. It's almost like Sanskrit, you can probably understand in Hindi. The Shuddha Manas, the pure mind, the pure Buddhi, and the pure Atman are one and the same. Very interesting teaching. In what sense did he mean that? I think he means it in the same sense as this Kathopanishad verse, which is that if you have sufficiently purified your mind, that mind can reflect Atman, and in a certain sense can be said to be the Atman. The way that Swami Vivekananda used to put it is that we are already the Atman, and we're already knowers of the Atman. He says we already have the innate knowledge of the Atman. The problem is there are layers of impurity covering that knowledge of the Atman. So through spiritual practice, you remove those veils of impurity, those layers of impurity, and what's left? That innate knowledge becomes manifest. So maybe in that sense, Bhagavan Krishna is saying that even though the ordinary impure mind, which is full of worldly desires and attachments, cannot know the Atman, if you purified the mind, then that knowledge which is innate in you will be spontaneously manifest. Any questions about that? But this is tricky. I mean, it's not very obvious what Bhagavan Krishna is saying. Okay. So let's move on to the next shloka. This is the smaller meter, the shloka meter, so it'll be easier to recite. I'll repeat 1/4 and then you please repeat. Dehi nityam avadhyoyam Dehe sarvasya bharata Tasmat sarvani bhutani Natvam shochitum arhasi. Okay, so in the app, shloka 30. Hey Bharata, O Bharata. Bhagavan Krishna is addressing Arjuna, of course. Sarvasya dehe, in all bodies, I am dehi. Dehi is the embodied soul, the eternal soul which is in the physical body. This soul is what? Nityam. Everybody should know this. Eternal. And avadhyaha, indestructible. Can never be destroyed, slain, killed, anything. Tasmat, therefore, tvam, you, sarvani bhutani shochitum na arhasi. You should not grieve for anybody, for any creatures at all, for the ones you're going to kill, for those, for other people. You should not grieve. This is going back to the theme that was strongly emphasized in many previous verses. We were talking about how Bhagavan Krishna never tires of repeating the teaching that we are not the body, we are not the mind, but we are eternal souls which can never be killed. For instance, in 2.20, one of the most famous, Najayate mriyate va kadachan naim bhut. In fact, in Hindu funerals, this shloka is often read, 2.20. The Atman is never born, it never dies, as a way of giving consolation to people whose loved ones have passed away. So this, again, Krishna comes back to this theme. Why are you grieving? Your soul is eternal. It can never die. The body will perish, but you will remain. Okay, and then there's this other issue, which I already talked about long back, but you might ask, well, why does Krishna say the same thing again and again? Isn't that, there's a technical term for this in Sanskrit, punarukti dosha. In texts other than scripture, it's considered a defect for a text to be repeating the same point multiple times, unless there's something different, something new or different. But scriptures are different. The Vedas and Vedantic scriptures, what Shankara says, and what all the commentators, they really agree on this. They say, why does Bhagavan Krishna repeat the same thing and hammer us over the head with the same teaching? You are the Atman, you are the Atman. Because we're so dull, that's why. You see, just as if a fifth grader is not learning his or her, math or whatever he's trying to learn, what will the teacher do? The teacher will teach the same thing, that same lesson again and again until the student will get it, right? So that's the reason why Bhagavan Krishna is repeating it, the same teaching again and again. Okay, any questions before we move on?
Even if somebody gets hurt by
No, so that's a good question. That's why the next shloka comes up. It's very good. It's a good segue, that question. By the way, for people who are online who maybe can't hear the students who are in person, he's saying, well, then, if we're souls, then we should all have field days. And if we're angry with somebody, we can just kill them. What's the problem? It's an interesting question. So Bhagavan Krishna, because he's God, he's omniscient, so he knew you would ask that question. And so he anticipated it. And so in the next shloka, he answers it. Okay, so again, I'll recite first. Swadharmam apicha vekshya navikampitum arhasi dharmyad hi yuddhat shreyonyat kshatriyasya na vidyate. Okay. Swadharmam api cha aveksha. So now this is very interesting because all along now Bhagavan Krishna has been talking from a very high Vedantic standpoint. You are actually not the body, you're not minds, you are eternal souls. And now he's shifting gears suddenly. Why? Why the shift in gears? Different commentators give different reasons for this. But first, let's understand the shloka, then we can talk about this. Swadharmam apicha aveksha. Looking at this issue, this question of whether you should fight or not, from the standpoint of swadharma, even from the standpoint of swadharma. What is swadharma? Any of you know? What is it? Yeah, good. One's own dharma. Sri Aurobindo has a nice translation. One's own law of being. Yeah, but there are many translations. It's almost untranslatable, actually. So we can use this Sanskrit term, swadharma. Even from that standpoint, what? Vikampitum na aharasi. You should not quake. You should not tremble. You should not fear entering into this war and killing. Hi dharmyad yuddhat kshatriyasya anyat shreyaha na vidyate. There's no greater good. No shreya. Shreya here means there's no greater good. For a who? For a kshatriya. For somebody who follows the kshatriya dharma, the warrior dharma, than a righteous war. Yuddhat. Dharmyad yuddhat. It's a dharmiya yuddha. This is not Hitler's side of World War II. This is Arjuna's fighting on the right side of the war. He's defending right and justice and goodness. And his dharma is to fight, because that's the caste he belongs to. So from the standpoint of duty also, it is right for Arjuna to fight in this war. Okay? So that's basically the gist of this verse. Now coming back to this issue of why exactly does Bhagavan Krishna shift gears here like this? Shankara, as far as I understand his commentary, he says that all along Bhagavan Krishna has been giving this kind of highest Vedantic teaching and trying to convince Arjuna to fight on that basis. But then Krishna might be thinking, okay, but maybe he's not up to that kind of highest teaching. Let me come down a couple notches. Speak to him mano y mano. And So that's why he switches to the social standpoint. From the standpoint of social duty, also, Arjuna, you should also fight for these reasons. Like a good lawyer, if you're trying to make a case, prove your client is innocent, you might give 3 different reasons, and they might be independent reasons. One reason, okay, if you don't buy that, here's a second reason. If you don't buy that, here's a third reason, right? That's Shankara's interpretation. Sri Aurobindo gives a different interpretation, which I like. Not that, and it's compatible with Shankara's. It's not that they're contradictory, but I want you to think about his as well. Now, one issue with this app, it's very good, but not perfect. So if the developers are watching, there's a little room for improvement. With the way that what happens is they have these, Sri Aurobindo wrote a 600-page English commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, but not shloka, but like it's not, he doesn't arrange it in the way that Sanskrit commentators used to, like where there's a shloka and then he explains it. So it sometimes makes it's difficult to figure out exactly what passages in his commentary refer to which verses. So in this app, the developers have tried to give his commentaries on particular verses. Sometimes they leave out some important information. So, okay, by the way, so this is a case. So don't even bother to go to the commentary. I'm going to tell you guys who are new here, the commentary is that second from the left on the bottom of the screen. There's this kind of text box looking thing. You can click that. Sometimes it's grayed out, which means they're not giving commentary on that. Sri Aurobindo's commentary, but this is not grayed out, which means it's there. The problem is it's not very helpful because they quote the wrong part, or either the wrong part or just part of. So what am I using, by the way? You might be interested in knowing what book am I using. I'm going to show it online too. Bhagavad Gita and its message. It's Sri Aurobindo is the author, edited by Anil Baran Roy, which is a little bit, it might seem strange, with text, translation, and Sri Aurobindo's commentary. As I just mentioned, because that 600-page commentary of Essays on Gita is not arranged shloka by shloka, what this book does is it arranges it shloka by shloka. And in footnotes, it gives the relevant parts of Sri Aurobindo's commentary. And this does a better job, I believe, than, no offense to the app developers, in giving the relevant commentaries on each of the verses. So what I'll do is I'll read from the commentary given here rather than in the app, because I think the app's commentary is it's still Sri Aurobindo's commentary, but it's kind of too out of context. So let me read this. Okay. And this comes back to your question, by the way. Don't worry. See, he begins with this. Sri Aurobindo asks, but how does this self-knowledge justify the action demanded of Arjuna in the slaughter of Kurukshetra? Right? It's like your question. Okay, Krishna, you've been talking for a long time about how we're not bodies, we're not minds, we're eternal souls. But that still doesn't give me a good reason to kill these people. So then, Sri Aurobindo says, the answer, and so this is his commentary on this shloka, 2.31. The answer is that this is the action required of Arjuna in the path he has to travel. I wonder whether this is some dust or something in the ventilation, or maybe it's just me. Okay. Okay. It has come inevitably in the performance of the function demanded of him by his swadharma. And then Sri Aurobindo adds, the Kshatriya ideal. Okay. Arjuna's social duty, the law of his life and the law of his being. So this is Sri Aurobindo's explanation. He says, why does Bhagavan Krishna shift gears from talking about us being eternal souls to going suddenly into explaining Arjuna's social duty? Because if he weren't a Kshatriya, even if we're eternal souls, it wouldn't make sense for us to go around killing people, even if those people are bad people. We can't take, the law into our own hands and, right? Be vigilantes. But it's because that's his social duty. That's what's expected of him in society. That's what he's been trained to do. Because of his own skills. You might ask, again, we discussed this briefly last semester, but for those of you who are new, the caste system is a very sensitive issue in Hinduism, right? And so when Bhagavan Krishna talks about your caste is the Kshatriya caste, what does he mean by caste system here? There are two fundamentally different ways of thinking about the caste system. One is the way that it's often understood, which is that it's hereditary. It means that people are born into a caste. You're born as a Brahmin, or you're born as a Kshatriya, you're born as a Shudra, whatever it is. But Bhagavad Gita does not seem to understand caste in a hereditary manner. When it ends up defining caste, it does so in chapter 18, much later in the Gita, in the last chapter of the Gita. It defines caste. How do you determine your caste? In terms of your guna and your karma. These two key Sanskrit terms, guna and karma. Here, guna means your own innate qualities, your innate temperament, your talents, your strengths, your weaknesses. Taking all that into account, that's guna, captured by guna. But also karma. Maybe there's some people who are underachievers. They're full of all sorts of great qualities, but they're lazy, or they don't realize their full potential. So that's why Bhagavan Krishna also has karma. Even if you have all these innate talents, let me see what you're doing in this life with those talents. Some people, they're incredible geniuses, and then they don't do much because they want to sit all day and play video games. It's a tragedy. There's one, I'm not going to name the name, obviously, but I was at Berkeley as an undergraduate. In my first year, I shared the hall with this, he was like Olympic level swimmer, incredibly talented swimmer. In high school, he was recruited because he was so good. He was on the Cal swim team. And then from day one, somebody got him hooked on this. It was a very popular online game at the time. What was it called? The World of Warcraft or something like that. It was some earlier version, I think, of Warcraft. And he just spent all day, I'm not kidding, something like 20 hours a day. Just he wouldn't go to class. He wouldn't go to the dining hall. And so there's this Chinese restaurant, which is like this fast food Chinese restaurant just behind our dormitory. He would just run off for 20 minutes to get some, take out Chinese food and then run back so they could play his. The result is that he was svelte, when he started out, when he first came. As I said, Olympic level swimmer. He got a pot belly. He had to drop out of the swim team. It was really a tragedy. Anyway, this is not necessary for me to say this, but anyway, guna and karma. Just having the guna is not enough. Guna and karma. Back up your gunas with your karma. Show in your life, in your day-to-day behavior and your actions, that you live up to your inherent qualities and that you're actually realizing your innate potential. In any case, this is the way that Swami Vivekananda encouraged us to think about this caste system. And he says, if we think about the caste system in this way, it's very rational and a wonderful way to run society. The idea is that in a society, in a well-functioning society, every person, every member of that society will benefit him or herself and benefit society optimally the most if you do the thing that best suits your own nature and what you're best at and the kind of things you're doing. Right? So anyway, this is a controversial issue and there are different interpretations of the Bhagavad Gita, but this is the interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita understanding of caste that I favor. And that's in line with Swami Vivekananda and a number of other thinkers. Okay, so that was a digression on what caste system means. And okay, and then yeah, okay, I think this is enough for this shloka. I was thinking of going into Ramanuja here, but yeah, please. Well, 2.30, no, everybody should, in the sense that, oh, I see, you should not. No. Well, okay, look, I mean, from the highest standpoint, from the highest Vedantic standpoint, nobody should grieve for anybody. I mean, you shouldn't kill people. So there's two separate issues. One was the question you asked, which is, does shloka 30 mean that we should, kill people that we're not happy with? No, obviously not. Or even that should we kill people who are evildoers? No, not everybody should do that either, right? But you're asking a slightly different question. Sorry, repeat your question. Oh, okay. Yeah, no. So Bhagavan Krishna in the next shloka, he basically, I hope, answers that question by saying that it's because Arjuna is a warrior and leading an army in a just war. And if he doesn't fight in this war, or if they lose the war, then great harm will befall society. He is on the side of justice, of ritam. That's the basic idea. But he's speaking to Arjuna specifically. That's the important thing. The context is important. Who is the addressee? The addressee is the warrior Arjuna, whose swadharma, whose law of being is to be a kshatriya, a warrior. And a warrior should never cower in the face of battle. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? No. Okay. And about 5 minutes before we wrap up the class, as usual, we'll do a brief meditation. Shloka 32. Please move to that in the app. Yadrichaya chopapannam swargadvaram apavritam sukinaha kshatriyaha partha labhante yuddham idrisham. Okay. Hey Partha, O Arjuna, yat richaya swargadvaram apavritam upapannam cha idrisham yuddham. So when this kind of battle comes to you unsought for, you didn't ask for this, but it came to you, and it's like an open gate of heaven, swargadvaram apavritam, and it's come to you unsought. It's not like you're seeking it out. That might be, it's your ego who wants it, but no, it's fallen into your lap. Sukhina kshatriyaha lavante. Any kshatriya, anybody whose duty it is to fight in a just war and to fight valorously, should be thrilled to be presented with this opportunity. That's the basic gist of this verse. Here, fortunately, the app has given the relevant part of Sri Aurobindo's commentary. I think it's very nice. So let's read it. It's short. Sri Aurobindo says, what is the true, are you all there? It's the second to the left. Okay. What is the true object of the Kshatriya's life and his true happiness? Not self-pleasing and domestic happiness and a life of comfort and peaceful joy with friends and relatives, but to battle for the right is his true object of life, and to find a cause for which he can lay down his life, or by victory win the crown and glory of the hero's existence is his greatest happiness. Right? In every culture, you'll find that the people who adhere to this warrior code, in European countries, it was this law of chivalry. There's a period when knights in shining armor would fight, So honor is very important to them, and fighting bravely and with honor, that's a very important value for them, because that was their swadharma, their duty. So that's what Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna. I'm reminded of, how many of you read some of Shakespeare's plays? Have any of you read Julius Caesar? In India, most people are taught Shakespeare, right? Especially Julius Caesar. Yeah, there are some lines in there spoken by Julius Caesar which have become so famous and popular that it's become an idiom in English. Not the original words of Shakespeare, but the phrase is, a coward dies 1,000 deaths, but, anyone know how to finish that idiom or that expression? A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a hero dies but once. A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a hero dies but once. So that's the idea. Even if you die, why should you fear? If you're a warrior, it's your swadharma to fight bravely for a just cause. If you die once, and it's an honorable death. And your soul is not going to be harmed. In fact, it'll be benefited because it's actually helping you on the spiritual path toward God. Right? But a coward dies 1,000 deaths. In what sense?
It's
Yeah.
fear.
Yeah, it's a metaphor, obviously. He's not literally dying 1,000 times. Everybody only dies once in that sense. I mean, at least in this body. But the idea is that you're constantly dying in the sense that you're losing dignity, losing self-respect, you're losing the respect of others. You have no sense of self and purpose in life. In that sense, dying constantly. Okay. Okay, any questions before we move on to the next Shloka 33? Yes.
After that,
Yes, please.
Vivekananda has this famous quote, right? Courage is life, weakness is death.
Yes.
So,
Good. Yes. So Swami Vivekananda said something similar. Courage is life, weakness is death. Is that exactly what he said? Yeah? Okay. Good. I'll trust you. I'll take your word for that. Courage is life, weakness is death. Yes. And the only sin is weakness, he would say. Good. Yes. I mean, he got a lot of the teachings from, he said, all I teach is from the Upanishads and from the Bhagavad Gita. He said Upanishads, but as an extension, he understood the Gita to be, he once described the Gita in a beautiful way. He says, the Bhagavad Gita is the best commentary we have on the Upanishads. It's a very nice way of thinking about what is the Bhagavad Gita? Because it's not part of the Vedas, it's part of the Mahabharata, which is this great epic, right? Smriti, not Shruti. So you might say, well, then why is that held in such high esteem? Because it's the greatest commentary we have on the Upanishads, to the point where it itself is, it's as if on the same footing as the Upanishads themselves, because it's such a wondrous commentary, such a beautiful commentary, such a penetrating commentary. And because it does such a beautiful job of harmonizing the apparently conflicting or contradictory passages in the Upanishads. Because the Upanishads are not systematic. So these great rishis would be saying different things based on their realizations, and it seems to be like, whoa, the Upanishad moves from this point to this point. How do we make sense of everything? How do these different thoughts cohere? The Bhagavad Gita shows how to harmonize these different passages and these different ideas from the Upanishads. Okay, so chapter 2, Shloka 33. Atha chet tvamimam dharmyam sangramam nakarishyasi tataswadharmam kirtim cha hitva papamavapsyasi. Good. Your Sanskrit, everybody's Sanskrit is excellent. I'm very impressed. Okay. Anvaya atha tvam imam dharmyam sangramam nakarishyasi chet. If you do not engage in this righteous dharmyam sangrama, battle, then what happens? Tataha swadharmam kirtim cha hitva papam avapsyasi. You will be abandoning hitva. What? Your own swadharma, your own law of being dictated to you by your guna and karma, not because you were born into the family, but because this is what your innate talents and qualities make you best fit for, and the best way for you to contribute to society. And kirtim cha, and your own honor. You're also abandoning your own honor and your own self-respect and the respect of other people. And you will incur sin, papam avapsyasi. It's sinful not to do your own duty dictated to you by your innate qualities and your karma. It's actually a sin. You're actually going to be moving backwards on the spiritual path in that case. And you will also be harmed even from a worldly standpoint, because people will be ridiculing you and looking down on you, which is humiliating. Okay. Yeah, there's nothing philosophically deep here, but and he goes on in the next verse to kind of continue this idea. So let's go to the next verse. Unless you have questions. Yes, please. Good. We're going to get to that because that's a very good. You're saying, well, why should Arjuna, why should any of us care what other people think of us? We're going to get to that. Remind me of that if I forget, because specifically Shloka 36. Because in Shloka 36, Bhagavan Krishna makes this point even more emphatically. People will call you nasty names. Avachya vadam shibahun. People will say all sorts of nasty things about you. Do you really want that? What can be worse than that? And you're very reasonably asking, well, who cares if people say stupid things about you? Okay, but we're going to get there. This is good because it's like we're ending this class on a cliffhanger so that you guys will come back for more. Okay, because I think it's time for, I think we should, do you think we should move on to the meditation and then, or yeah, I think so, because we have the Arati, right, at 7:30. Okay, so today we'll end with Shloka 33. Starting next class, we'll start with Shloka 34. And please remind me of that issue if I don't bring it up. But I plan to bring it up in the context of Shloka 36 because all these shlokas are, these 4 shlokas go together actually. And so before I answer your question, I want to cover some of these other shlokas first. Any questions before the meditation? No? Okay. So now sit comfortably, however you like to meditate, whether it's in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, what's taught is Sukhasanam, Sukham Sthiramasanam. You might think that these yoga, you have to do all sorts of difficult postures like the lotus posture, which is Padmasana, which is very difficult. You have to put both your feet on your thighs, which is very difficult. But no, whatever is comfortable for you. Even if a chair, if you can't even sit on the floor, then sit on a chair. Sukham Sthiram. Whatever makes you comfortable and happy, and Sthiram, where your spine is kept straight and your body is still. Okay. My favorite is the Adda Padmasana, where you take one foot up. It's not as difficult as the full Padmasana. So that's what I'll do, but you are free to do whatever you want. So gently close your eyes. And imagine a light in your heart, a kind of ball of light in your heart. This is a spiritual light. This is the light of the Atman, our eternal soul. So we'll be meditating on our true nature as eternal souls. We are not this physical body. So even if the physical body is in pain, even if the physical body perishes, we are not this physical body. We're not even the mind. So even if bad thoughts come up in the mind is full of anxiety, we are not anxious in our fundamental natures as souls. So let's meditate now on our nature as Atmans, as eternal souls. So picture this light in your heart and please chant with me, Om. We'll be chanting it very kind of slowly for a few minutes. Now gently open your eyes. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Are we having class? Oh, we should shut the recording. Okay. Thank you, everyone online. Whoever, maybe just the two of you, your parents. I don't know.